"Don't make a sound," the security guard whispered, pressing his hand flat against the door. "Trust me, ma'am. You need to see this first." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there in the hallway of the Fairmont Chateau Laurier, in my navy blue dress that I'd bought 3 weeks ago, specifically for this weekend, holding a small gift bag with a card that said, "Welcome to the family, sweetheart," and I stared at the man in front of me like he'd lost his mind. His name was Gerald. He'd worked security at this hotel for 11 years. I knew that because he'd told me the night before at the rehearsal dinner when he'd helped me find my reading glasses under one of the banquet chairs. He had kind eyes and a gray mustache, and the kind of steady, unhurried way of moving that made you feel like nothing could go wrong when he was nearby. That feeling was gone now. "Gerald," I said quietly, "my son's wedding starts in 4 hours. Whatever this is—" "I know," he said. "That's why I came to find you. Please." 5 minutes. I followed him. "My name is Dorothy, and I am 63 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life being described as practical. My late husband Robert used to say it like a compliment, "You're the most practical woman I've ever known," and I always took it as one. I am not prone to dramatics. I do not catastrophize. I taught high school mathematics in Ottawa for 31 years, and if there is anything that profession teaches you, it is how to stay calm when everything around you is in chaos. But standing outside room 412 of that hotel on the morning of my son's wedding, listening through a crack in the door to a conversation that made my stomach drop straight through the floor, I was not calm. I was not practical. I was a mother, and every instinct I had was screaming. Let me go back. My son's name is Thomas. He is 34 years old, an environmental engineer with the federal government, and he is one of the genuinely good people in this world. Not in a naive way, in the way that comes from choosing every single day to be honest and fair and kind, even when it costs something. Robert and I used to look at him and feel that quiet pride that parents feel when they realize their child turned out better than they had any right to expect. Thomas met his fiancée, I'll call her Claire, 14 months ago at a charity auction in Gatineau. She was beautiful, well-spoken, seemed thoughtful. She told Thomas she worked in nonprofit communications and had moved to Ottawa from Vancouver 2 years prior. She had a warmth about her that felt genuine, and Thomas was happier than I'd seen him since before his father passed. I liked her. I want to say that clearly, because what comes next is not the story of a mother who never approved. I brought her flowers the first time Thomas introduced us. I invited her to Sunday dinners. I helped her find a dentist when she moved into Thomas's apartment because she said she didn't know the area well yet. I liked her. And then, slowly, I began to notice things that didn't quite add up. Small things at first. The way she changed the subject whenever her family in Vancouver came up. The fact that in 14 months, not a single friend from her life before Ottawa had visited or even appeared on her phone screen when she was showing me photos. The way she tensed, just slightly, just for a second whenever someone mentioned social media. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was one of those mothers who would find fault with anyone Thomas chose simply because no one would ever be enough. I talked myself out of my instincts so many times that I started to believe my own arguments. Then, 6 weeks before the wedding, my sister Margaret called me. Margaret lives in Abbotsford, and she is the opposite of practical. She is the kind of person who reads horoscopes seriously and once drove 4 hours to see a medium in Kelowna. But she is also sharp, and she pays attention, and when she calls with something specific, it's worth listening. "I'm probably wrong," she said, which is how she always starts when she's not wrong at all. But I was looking at the wedding photos Thomas posted on Facebook, the engagement ones. And I swear to you, I swear that woman was at my neighbor Denise's daughter's wedding 4 years ago, in Langley, as a guest, with a man who was introduced to everyone as her husband. I went very still. "Margaret," I said. "Are you sure?" "No," she said. "That's why I said I'm probably wrong. But Denise still has the photos. The woman in them has different hair, and she's called something different, but the face, the face is the same." I didn't sleep that night. Or the next one. I want to tell you that I handled what came next with grace and wisdom and good judgment. I want to tell you that I went to Thomas immediately, laid everything out clearly, and allowed him to make an informed decision. That is not what happened. What happened is that I was terrified. Thomas adored this woman. The wedding was 6 weeks away, and deposits had been paid, and family was flying in from Halifax and Winnipeg, and Thomas's best friend was coming from London specifically for this. If I was wrong, if Margaret was wrong, I would damage something between my son and me that I might never repair. I had watched other mothers do exactly that, convinced that their instincts trumped their children's choices, and I had watched those relationships fracture. So I waited. I watched. I looked for something concrete before I said a word. What I found 3 weeks later was not what I was looking for. I was helping Claire address the last of the wedding invitations at her kitchen table. Thomas was working late when her second phone rang. I didn't know it was a second phone. I thought it was her regular one, which was on the counter. When I looked up, she was pulling a different phone, an older one, from the bottom of her bag, and the look on her face when she saw the screen was nothing like the face of a woman who was 3 weeks from the happiest day of her life. It was the face of someone who had been dreading a call. She stood up and went to the bathroom. She was in there for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock, hands flat on the table, not moving. When she came back, she was composed again, smiled at me, picked up her pen, asked me something about the seating chart. I smiled back. I said something about the seating chart. And I decided that night that I was going to find out the truth before I said anything to Thomas, because I would only get one chance to say it, and I needed to be certain. What I found, and I will not tell you exactly how I found it, because some of that involved asking for help from people in ways I'm not entirely proud of, was enough to make me sit down on the floor of my kitchen at 11 o'clock at night and just breathe. Claire's real name was Sandra. She was 37, not 32 as she'd told Thomas. She had been married in Langley, British Columbia, 4 years ago, exactly as Margaret had said, and as far as the records I could find indicated, she was still married. Her husband's name was Patrick. They had a daughter together who was 3 years old. She had not divorced him. There was no record of it anywhere. She had simply moved to Ottawa, built a new life, changed her name by a slight variation that looked like a typo until you knew to look for it, and started over. And she had found my son, my kind, trusting, successful son, and she had been building toward this wedding with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Thomas owns a house. Robert left him a portion of his estate. Thomas has a federal pension and investments that a financial advisor friend of mine once described, without knowing I was listening, as very well structured. He is not a wealthy man by the standards of Bay Street, but he is stable and careful and solvent in a way that is genuinely rare. Sandra Claire had found all of that, and she had decided it was worth becoming a different person. I had everything I needed. I had dates and records and my sister's neighbor, Denise, willing to send the photos from that Langley wedding. I had a folder of information sitting on my kitchen counter, and I had 4 weeks before the wedding, and I made the mistake of going to Thomas. Not the way I should have. I panicked. I called him on a Tuesday evening when he was tired from work, and I had been sitting with this information for 48 hours, and I was not calm and practical Dorothy who taught mathematics for 31 years. I was a frightened mother who hadn't slept properly in 3 weeks. Thomas listened. And then he said something that I replay often, because I understand it even though it broke my heart a little. He said, "Mom, I think you need to talk to someone about how you've been feeling since Dad died." He didn't say it cruelly. He said it with love and worry, and that almost made it worse. He thought this was grief. He thought I had invented a threat to his happiness because I couldn't handle the idea of his life moving forward without his father in it. I told him I had a folder. I told him to come and look at it. He said he would, and then the days passed, and he didn't come. And when I called again, he told me gently that he and Claire had talked and that she had explained that she did have a complicated past and that she'd shared it with him and he was satisfied. And could we please just focus on the wedding? I stood in my kitchen holding the phone after he hung up, and I thought, he didn't look at the folder. He didn't look at it. He took her word for it because he loved her and because the alternative was too painful to consider this close to the wedding. I called Margaret. Margaret said, "Dot, you have to go to the wedding. You have to be there." She was right. If I stayed home in protest, I would lose my son. And if I went and stayed quiet, I would watch him marry a woman who was already someone else's wife. And in this country, And I want to be clear about this because I know something about Canadian family law from a friend who practiced it for 20 years. What was about to happen was not just a moral problem, it was a criminal one. Bigamy in Canada is a criminal offense under the criminal code. It carries real consequences. And my son had no idea. So I packed my bag, I drove to the Fairmont Chateau Laurier, I checked into my room, I attended the rehearsal dinner, and I smiled and I hugged my son, and I told his fiancée she looked beautiful, because she did, and because I still had no idea what I was going to do. And then Gerald knocked on my door at 7:45 in the morning. He had found something. That is what he told me in the hallway, his voice low, his eyes steady. The night before, doing his rounds, he had found a phone. Not lost, left, deliberately placed at the back of a drawer in the small business center on the second floor, which had been reserved by the wedding party that evening. An older phone, the kind you buy prepaid at a Shoppers Drug Mart and don't register to your name. Gerald was a former municipal police officer. He had retired early because of his knees, not because of his instincts. His instincts were intact. He had turned the phone on. He had not gone through it, he was very clear about that, and I believed him, but the screen had lit up with a notification, a single text message visible without unlocking it, from a contact saved only as a letter. The message said, "The account clears Thursday, don't wait past Friday." He had seen me the night before. He had watched me during the rehearsal dinner in the way that people who are trained to observe learn to watch without staring. He had seen something in me that I thought I had hidden, the particular tension of a person who is waiting for something terrible to happen. "I'm not saying I know what this means," he said, standing in that hallway, "but you looked last night like someone who was already carrying something heavy, and when I found this, I thought of you. I don't know why. Call it old instinct." He led me to the second floor, to an alcove near the stairwell. He had the phone in a hotel envelope, and he held it so I could see the screen when he turned it on without touching it myself. The notification was still there. But there were others now, incoming since the night before, and the name at the top of the most recent thread was not a letter. Someone had written back from the other end, and in doing so, the full name of the contact had populated. The name was Patrick. And the most recent message, sent 40 minutes ago, said, "The lawyer says we have grounds to void it anyway. Just come home. Bring Sophie her birthday present. She keeps asking where you are." Sophie, 3 years old, asking where her mother was. I stood in that alcove and I held onto the wall, and I breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way I used to tell my students to breathe before an exam that they'd been dreading. I did it 4 times. Gerald stood next to me and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. Then I said, "Gerald, I need to make a phone call, and I need to ask you to stay nearby for the next few hours." He said, "I've got nowhere else to be." I called my sister. Margaret answered on the second ring, because Margaret always answers, and I told her to call Denise and ask her to send every single photograph she had from that Langley wedding to my email, right now, this morning. Margaret asked no questions. She just said, "Give me 15 minutes. Then I called a number I had saved in my phone 3 weeks ago when I was still hoping I would never need it. The number for the Ottawa Police Service non-emergency line. I want to say something here, because I think it matters. I did not make that call out of anger. I did not make it to punish Sandra. I made it because my son was 45 minutes from walking into a ceremony that would not be legal, and because somewhere in Langley, British Columbia, a little girl named Sophie was asking where her mother was, and the woman her mother had become was about to commit a serious crime in a hotel ballroom on the 4th floor, and I was the only person in that building who knew all of it. The officer I spoke with was patient and professional. I gave her everything: the name, the dates, the records, the incoming message on the phone, my sister's contact information, Denise's photographs. She asked me to stay on the line while she consulted with a colleague. I waited. The hotel corridor was quiet. Gerald stood 6 feet away, hands clasped, looking at the wall. The officer came back. She asked me one more time if I was certain of the documented name discrepancy. I told her about the records. She said someone would be there within the hour, but that she strongly advised me to speak with my son privately before any other action was taken. And that is what I should have done 6 weeks ago. I know that now. I walked to Thomas's room and I knocked on the door. It was 8:15 in the morning. He answered in a dress shirt, half ready, and the look on his face when he saw mine, I will never forget it. Not shock, exactly. Something quieter than that. The look of someone who has been not quite believing something for a while and suddenly stops fighting it. I said, I need 10 minutes. Please let me have 10 minutes before you say anything. He let me in. I sat down on the edge of the small armchair by the window. He sat on the corner of the bed, and I told him everything, quietly and clearly, the way I should have told him weeks ago, not frightened and frantic on a Tuesday night, but organized, factual, in the way that 31 years of teaching had given me. I had the folder. I had Margaret's information. I had the photographs that had come through to my phone while I was standing in the hallway, 7 pictures from a wedding in Langley 4 years ago, and in 3 of them, clearly, unmistakably, was Sandra, standing beside a man in a gray suit, laughing, with a bouquet of white tulips. Thomas looked at the photographs for a long time. He didn't say anything. His jaw was tight and his eyes were very still, and I watched him put the pieces together in the particular way that precise, intelligent people do when they encounter something they really, truly do not want to be true. Then he said, very quietly, the phone conversations she always took in the other room. Yes, I said. The account, she said, was an old savings thing from before, that she was waiting to close. I think so. She has a child. Her name is Sophie. She'll be 4 in I don't know exactly when. Thomas put his face in his hands. He didn't cry, not then. He just sat there with his face covered, and I got up from the chair and sat next to him on the bed and put my hand on his back, and neither of us said anything for a while. I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't find a better way to tell you sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. Stop, he said. Don't apologize. He lifted his face. His eyes were dry and very tired looking. You tried. I didn't listen. That's on me. A knock at the door came at 9:20. I had asked Gerald to direct them here. 2 officers, plain clothes, quiet. They spoke with Thomas first, briefly, and then they asked where the suite was, and Thomas told them, and one of the officers said they would handle it with as much discretion as the situation allowed. I do not know exactly what was said in that suite. I was not there. Thomas asked me to wait in his room, and I did, and I sat by the window and looked out at the Ottawa River, silver and calm in the September morning, and I thought about Robert, the way I always do when something important happens. I thought, you would have found the right words by now. You always found the right words. What I was told afterward, by Thomas, who was told by one of the officers, Sandra did not deny it. When they showed her what had been found, when they said what they knew, she simply sat down on the bed in her wedding dress. She had already been dressed. The ceremony was 90 minutes away, and she put her hands in her lap and she said, I'm tired. Just that. I'm tired. I have thought about those words many times since then. I don't know what I expected, defiance perhaps, or excuses, or one more performance. But I'm tired is the thing that stays with me. I think she was. I think constructing a second life from scratch, maintaining it for over a year, planning a wedding, while somewhere across the country, a 3-year-old was asking where her mother was. I think she was exhausted in a way that had very little to do with the morning. She was escorted out of the hotel. The wedding guests, most of whom had gathered in the lobby and begun to notice that something was wrong, were told only that the ceremony would not be taking place. No other explanation was given. The hotel staff were professional and kind. Gerald stood near the door and made sure everything stayed orderly. Thomas came and found me in his room at 10:45. He looked like someone who had run a very long distance and arrived somewhere unexpected. He sat down in the armchair and I sat on the bed and we looked at each other. I have 140 guests downstairs, he said. I know. And a DJ. And a cake. Thomas, I already paid for the flowers. Thomas! I leaned forward. Come to dinner tonight. Just you and me. We'll order from that Thai place on Elgin that you like. And we can talk. As long as you want. He looked at me for a moment. Then he made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that wasn't a laugh at all. She seemed so real, he said. I know. I really thought, I know you did. I moved to the armchair and crouched next to it and held his hands. That is not a failure on your part. Loving someone who turned out to be a lie is not a failure. It just means you were willing to love. That part of you is good. That part stays. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. After a while, he said, "How long have you known?" "Suspected about 7 weeks. Known for certain 3. He opened his eyes. "Why didn't you just—" "I tried," I said. "You weren't ready to hear it. And I didn't push hard enough because I was afraid of losing you. That was my mistake." "Not the only one." He nodded slowly. "She really has a daughter." "Yes. Does the little girl know anything about—" "I don't think so." "She's 3. He was quiet for a moment. "I hope she's okay," he said. "The little girl, that is my son." Even then, even in the rubble of that morning, his first thought, once he'd processed the shock, was for a child he'd never met. Robert would have been so proud. I want to end this by saying something to you. Because if you have listened this far, then I think maybe you are someone who has been carrying something too. A suspicion you've been talking yourself out of. A conversation you've been postponing because the timing is never right. A truth you know in the part of yourself that sits quiet when everything else is loud. I spent 7 weeks managing my instincts instead of trusting them. I spent 3 weeks with proof in my hands, waiting for the right moment. And I almost watched my son walk into a marriage that would have unraveled him not just emotionally, but legally, financially, in every way. I got lucky. Gerald got lucky with that drawer in the business center. My sister got lucky with her memory. Not everyone gets those second chances. If you love someone, and something is telling you to look more carefully, please look. You can be wrong, and being wrong is survivable. The conversation will be hard. The relationship might need repair, but it will be there to repair. Thomas and I had dinner that night at the Thai place on Elgin Street. We sat at the window and split the green curry and talked for almost 4 hours. He cried at one point, briefly, and then straightened up and said something self-deprecating that made me laugh, and I thought, there he is. There's my boy. He is fine. He is better than fine. He started seeing a counselor in November, which I think is one of the bravest things he's done. He talks to me more now than he has in years. Something about surviving a hard thing together, I think it clears away whatever distance had grown in between. I still keep the folder. I don't know why exactly. I don't look at it, but I know it's there, in the top drawer of my desk, next to the photograph of Robert and me at our own wedding, 40 years ago, in a church in Canada that doesn't exist anymore. You only get one life, and most of it is not dramatic. Most of it is grocery lists and phone calls, and the particular pleasure of a good cup of coffee on a Saturday morning when you have nowhere to be. Most of it is ordinary and small and enough. But sometimes it asks something of you. Sometimes it asks you to be brave in a moment when you would very much prefer to look the other way. When that moment comes, be brave. Choose the hard conversation over the comfortable silence. Trust the part of you that already knows. That is everything I have to say. Thank you for being here with me today. If this reached you, I hope it helps. And if you are going through something of your own, please know that the people who love you would rather have the difficult truth than the comfortable version. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other.